Hey everyone. So I want to take a little bit of time to follow up on the poem that you were asked to read and discuss for the week 3 discussion. If you remember, that poem was My Last Duchess by Robert Browning. So I want to go through and kind of help you guys figure out what was going on in the poem, and then you'll be asked to respond in the week 4 journal. So for My Last Duchess by Robert Browning, first thing you have to know is, obviously this is not a contemporary poem. It was written in another era, and that's one reason why the language might make it harder to understand. Okay. Another thing that is interesting to know, you don't have to know this to understand the poem, but what is interesting to know is that Robert Browning is a very famous poet during his time, and he was married to another poet. Her name was Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and they had this very beautiful romance between the two of them, a very deep love. And you might actually know one of her poems, or at least the start, the beginning of one of her poems, even if you don't know that it's by her. But her most famous poem is How Do I Love Thee? Let Me Count the Ways. And that, I mean, she wrote it for him. So it's interesting, though, because while he had that side of himself as a poet, where it was all very romantic and lovely, he also had this other side of him where he created some very questionable, if not downright crazy, poetic characters. And that's what we have here in My Last Duchess. We are in Ferrara, and we are listening to the Duke of Ferrara speak. And if you remember, when I introduced the poem for the week 3 discussion, I mentioned that this is what we call a dramatic monologue. So it's poetry. This is not taken from a play of any sorts. It's just this poem. But in the context of the poem's story, the Duke is in the presence of another person, another character. We don't ever hear that character speak, and we have to connect the dots at the end to even really figure out who the other character is. But whoever it is, the Duke of Ferrara is speaking to this character. And what he is speaking turns out to be this poem that we are now reading. So what is it all about? Well, let's take a look at the title, right? Remember? So the title is My Last Duchess. So it could mean my last Duchess, meaning my final one. There will be no others after her. Or it could mean my last Duchess, my previous one, my most recent one, implying that there could be others after. Either way, this Duchess is no longer with us. We learn a lot about her. The poem seems to be mostly about her, but we also learn quite a bit about the Duke himself if we think really carefully about what he shares with us. So this is a little longer, so I'm not going to go necessarily line by line. I'm going to kind of go like little sections at a time to sort of paraphrase it, just like we did with My Papa's Waltz, like going through each section and literally like paraphrasing it and putting it in more understandable terms. So, that's My Last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. The painting is so real that it looks like she's alive. It could also indicate that the Duchess is no longer alive in real life either, right? I call that piece a wonder now. Frau Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Frau Pandolf is the man who painted the portrait of the Duchess. So his hands worked busily a day painting, and there she stands. There is the Duchess in this portrait. Will it please you sit and look at her? So he's asking the other character in the poem, would it please you to sit and look at this picture? And it seems weird, but there's a reason for it. And he says, I said Frau Pandolf by design, meaning I name dropped. I told you who the painter was because he's a very famous painter, and only the best of the best would be able to get Frau Pandolf to paint a portrait for them. So, I said Frau Pandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance. So, because, and the reason I'm telling you that it's Frau Pandolf is because anyone who has ever looked at this painting, they always turn to me because I'm the only one that will ever draw the curtain, so to show off this portrait. He says, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I. So the portrait is actually behind a curtain most of the time. So if anyone ever views the portrait, it's only because the Duke has chosen to open the curtain and reveal the portrait to them. But every time he has shown someone this portrait, they turn to him almost like they wanted to ask, but they don't end up asking, but it's almost like they want to ask how such a glance came to be there on the Duchess's face. So, you're not the first to turn and ask me, even though nobody's actually asked him. And certainly not the character who he's speaking to. The Duke has only said that it appears, it looks like that's what they want to ask him. So he's assuming that anyone who sees the portrait looks at the Duchess's face and wants to know how that expression came to be there. When in reality, maybe nobody wants to know that. Maybe nobody even cares, nobody notices, it's not even a thing, it's just a portrait of a woman, right? But in the Duke's mind, it is very important how her face appears in this portrait, and that he assumes everyone wants to know what was happening that would cause her to have that kind of expression on her face in the painting. And he says, you're not the first to ask me this, even though nobody asked him. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. So basically what he's saying is that joy that we're seeing in her portrait on her face, that it wasn't just her husband's presence that would cause that joy to be there. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. Perhaps Frau Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half-flush that dies along her throat. So basically he's saying, I don't know, maybe Frau Pandolf, the painter, happened to give her a compliment while he was painting her portrait, and it called up that spot of joy. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad. So she had a heart that felt happy, too soon made glad, meaning in his eyes, the Duke's eyes, she felt happy when she shouldn't have, or that the things that made her happy shouldn't have been enough to make her happy. And then he even gives us some examples. She had a heart too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. That starts to make us think that maybe she, was having affairs. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, 'twas all one. My favor at her breast, so her husband, right? The drooping of the daylight in the west, that's just the sunset. The bough of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, sir, eating a bowl of berries. Or the white mule she rode with round the terrace, or the white mule she rode, almost like horseback riding, except it's a mule. So no. Okay, no, she's not cheating on him. She's not sleeping around. She's not having affairs. What's making her happy, what her looks go on, what calls up that spot of joy is her husband's presence, but also the sunset and cherries and a mule. Why would those things make her so happy? That's what he's mad about. All and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. She thanked men good, but thanked somehow, I know not how. So she thanked people. He says men, but it's just she thanked men. Thank you for the cherries. Thank you for this. Thank you for that. Thank you for the compliment. Thank you for, uh, you know, bringing me my food. um, but she thanked all these other people just the same as she thanked him, the Duke, as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. So what he's saying is, he gave her the biggest and best gift of all, his name. His 900-year-old name, the Duke of Ferrara. And instead of putting him up on this pedestal and giving him the most appreciative thanks of all, she says the same kind of thank you to everybody. Everything makes her happy, but he thinks he should be raised above all those other ordinary things. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Like, so who would stoop to point out that she should be thanking me more? You know, even if you had skill in speech, which I have not, even though the Duke does have skill in speech, clearly, if you listen, if you pay close attention. He's a very good orator. But he's saying, even if you had skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such an one and say, just that, and you disgust me, or here you miss, or there exceed the mark. So he's saying, even if you had the skill of speech to look at someone and say, I don't really like this about you, or this upsets me. I wish you would change this, or do this differently, or this makes me incredibly happy when you do this. He's saying, even if you had the skill to put all of that into words, and even if she were to listen and learn and do better in your eyes, then it would still be stupid. And he chooses never to stoop. So basically what he's saying is, I don't really have the skill in speech to tell her what I really want, or what makes me happy and unhappy. I don't even have the skills to do that, even though he clearly does. But even if I did have those skills, and even if she would learn from it and try to do better, that would be stupid. I never stoop. Basically, she should just know. She should just know to thank me and to hold me higher than watching the sunset or riding a mule. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whenever I passed her. But who passed without much the same smile? They're saying, sure, yes, she loved me, and she showed me she loved me, and she smiled at me, and she blushed at me, and all those wonderful things, but she did it for everybody else, too. It didn't make me feel special enough. This grew, this kept on. I gave commands. Then all smiles stopped together. There she stands, as if alive. This kept going on. He gave commands. Then all smiles stopped. So the commands that he gave were to kill her. There she stands, as if alive. So he has basically just admitted to this person he's talking to, and to us, the reader, that he was jealous and upset and too insecure that his wife was a very joyful woman, that things, even little things, made her happy, and that she would she would have the same reaction to watching a beautiful sunset as she would sitting and talking with her husband or having, an intimate relationship with her husband, that it was all the same. And he did not like that because he should have been held up in a higher place than all those other things. But of course he's not going to talk to her about it because that would be stooping, that would be beneath him, and she should just know better. And since she never caught on and nothing ever changed, he just had her killed. Then he speaks directly to the other character. Will it please you rise? So let's stand up now. We're done looking at the picture. We'll meet the company below then. So we're going to go downstairs and meet everyone else who's waiting. I repeat, the Count, your master's known munificence. So now we know who this person is to a certain degree. The Count, your master. So whoever he's speaking to is someone who is there on behalf of the Count. So we've got a duke, right? The duke is the one speaking, and now we have a Count who has come into play. The Count is not the person who is standing there hearing the duke. The person who's standing there is someone who works on behalf of the Count, like an ambassador or an assistant. All right? That no just pretense of mine for dowry will be disallowed. Dowry is what you get in exchange in a wedding back in these days, right? Though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. So this is a negotiation because the Duke wants to marry the Count's daughter. And so during this negotiation with the Duke's ambassador, or with the Count's ambassador, the Duke has revealed what happened to his previous wife. And that he wants a new wife. Though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. Interesting play of words there, my object. Like she is not a person, she is my object, she's my possession. Just like this painting, and just like, notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which Klaus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. So as they're after he's just got done revealing all of this, admitting what happened to the last Duchess, and saying, and now, so let's go down and meet your master because I want to marry his daughter. She is my object now. Just like this statue that I'm showing you of Neptune taming a seahorse. And then he name drops again, which Klaus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. So we learned the sad fate of his last Duchess. And if we're paying close attention, it is a horrifying fate. And she seems like a very lovely lady, right? She really didn't seem to have done anything wrong. She just did not put him up on the pedestal that he thought he deserved. And he had her killed for it, and now he's searching for another woman to take her place, and hopefully by sharing this story with the Count's ambassador, perhaps they will make sure that the Count's daughter does not make the same mistakes that the last Duchess made. Interesting. We learn a lot about the Duke's character through all of this, if you're paying close attention. He is a narcissistic sociopath. Maybe a psychopath. But clearly he is all about himself. He expects her to put him on this pedestal. He makes all these humble remarks about himself, like, I'm not really all that great at speaking, even though he clearly is. And then he does all these name dropping, Frau Pandolf, Klaus of Innsbruck, like he's, takes every opportunity to make himself look good. And the fact that he's revealing what happened to his last Duchess, like, it doesn't even faze him that maybe that's not such a good thing to share with the ambassador of your potential father-in-law. It's like he thinks that he was totally in the right, and that the Count will understand and make sure that his daughter doesn't make the same mistake. So this is just a very interesting study in what we can learn about the speaker, not just what's happening in the poem, not just the action that's being described, but what the clues, if we read very closely, what is revealed to us about the speaker. That we have to connect the dots and examine the whole thing from start to finish and put everything in context, right? It makes a difference that there's somebody else that he is speaking these words to. It makes a difference that it's a dramatic monologue. It makes a difference knowing that, he keeps the portrait hidden unless he really wants to show it to someone. All of those little examples that he gives are so important. The examples of the things that made the last Duchess happy. Because you expect it to be something horrible. Like when he says, her looks went everywhere. She liked whatever she looked on and her looks went everywhere. Almost as if she was like a little floozy, right? But that's not what she was at all. She was just a happy girl. And then just everything else that he reveals tells you about the type of person he is. And it's just pretty cool how Browning is able to create that persona. And if you're not really paying attention, it can go right by you, and you think that he's just some regular old, rich duke, right? Whose wife, sadly, is no longer with us, and he's ready to get married again. It can all be very innocent, but you have to look closely because what it appears on the surface is not how it really is, and he is not the person that you think he is in the beginning. So, anyway, so that is My Last Duchess, and you guys are free now to work on the journal for this.